Chapter 34. Jack grabbed May's head with both hands and stared her straight in the eye. "How do you feel?" he asked her, looking from eye to eye. She seemed alright, but you never could tell with magic. "Does it hurt?" She looked at him miserably. "I don't feel any different," she said, "but it's like there are words I don't know anymore. Except it's not words. I can still say whatever I want. But when I try to use a tone, I just can't. Does that make sense?" Jack nodded slowly. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll find that thing and get back whatever it took, okay? Trust me, that little monster's not getting away with this." She smiled weakly at him. "Since when did you care so much, huh? I thought you hated royalty and all." Jack took a step back unconsciously. "I did," he said. I do." He rolled his eyes dramatically. "Leave it to a princess to assume basic human decency is something more." Her eyes narrowed, and she started to say something, then stopped, looking like she was searching for the right word. Finally, she sighed dejectedly, and her face fell. "Let's just go find Philippa. I'm ready to move on and forget all about this." Jack nodded, suddenly feeling absolutely terrible. Why had he said that? May had lost a part of herself to save him, and he insulted her? And it wasn't like he really thought badly of her. Not anymore.
They'd gotten closer as they'd traveled, and he did think of May as, well, as something.
He wasn't quite sure what he thought of her, but he knew it wasn't bad, princess or no. So why had he said that, especially after what she'd just been through? He ran his words through his head over and over, each time coming across worse than the last. "If I took our stuff somewhere when they dumped us here," May said, still not looking at him. "Your sword, the bag, the mirror." For some reason, the mention of the sword made him nervous, so he changed the subject. "Considering what good the bag's been so far, we're probably better off," Jack said as good-naturedly as he could. May glanced up at him, and he did everything he could to smile, apologizing as hard as he could without actually saying the words. "The bag itself was kinda cool," May said tentatively. If it could fit everything in the world in it, it might almost have been big enough for your ego." Jack raised an eyebrow. "I thought you couldn't be sarcastic." She shrugged, the hint of a smile playing across her face. "That wasn't sarcasm," she said. "I was making fun of you. Trust me, no one can take that away from me." And just like that, everything was forgiven. Opposite the jail cells, a door opened to a dark spiral stairway that sank into the Dragon Tail Tower. As they stood at the top of the stairs, they could barely make out a light at the end. A light meant the stairway led somewhere, probably somewhere with people, or more likely goblins. Still, there wasn't another choice. Jack led the way, wondering briefly as he trudged down the stairs what would happen at the end of all this. Eventually, they'd find May's grandmother and hopefully rescue her. Then that would be that. Jack would go back to his grandfather, while May and Philip went back to their royal lives. Despite all the obstacles still in their way, the thought of the quest ending gave him a strange feeling in the pit of his stomach. But why? It wasn't like he was an adventurer like his grandfather, or even his father for that matter. Jack knew the need for this sort of thing just wasn't built into him like it was in them. In fact, the whole quest so far had been pretty miserable, hadn't it? He glanced behind him up at the princess, who flicked her eyebrows twice at him. He grinned and turned back around. She was so adorable. Wait, what? Jack stopped dead in his tracks, causing May to plow straight into him. The princess's momentum pushed them both down a few more stairs before Jack caught himself against the wall, halting May's fall as well. "Sorry," she said quickly. "I totally didn't say you stop." "That's alright," he said, his face bright red in the dark. "I hadn't really planned on stopping." "Oh yeah?" she said, blowing the stray hair out of her face. "What happened?" Jack opened his mouth, then closed it, turned around, and started down the stairs. "We're almost there," he said, his face as hot as fire. "We should be quiet." "Gotcha," she whispered behind him, thankfully letting it go. The light they'd seen from above shone brightly through an uneven crack beneath another wooden door at the bottom of the stairs. Jack tiptoed up to the door and carefully pushed on it, just to test to see if it was locked. The door creaked open the slightest bit, hopefully not enough to be noticeable if anyone was watching from the other side. Now that he knew it was unlocked, Jack held his breath and listened against the door for any sounds, but there was only silence. He breathed out and ever so slowly pushed the door open, trying to catch a glimpse of what lay on the other side in case someone was waiting for them. Thankfully, the hallway outside looked deserted. "Okay, let's go," Jack said. "Remember, quietly, we don't want anyone to hear us." May nodded, so he pushed the door open the entire way. And almost ran into a short, fat goblin guard. "I heard ya," the goblin said. "Too bad for you, eh?" Jack froze. Instead of a sword, this guard held a battle axe in its stubby fingers, the blade covered in what looked like blood. Jack knew he could attack the goblin empty-handed, but that wouldn't end well. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything else in the room other than a desk and a frail-looking chair behind it. Nothing to use as a weapon. And then he saw his sword and his grandfather's bag sitting on top of the desk, along with some random items from the bag. Apparently the goblin had been looking for loot. Maybe Jack can make a grab for... "Excuse me," May said, stepping past Jack. The princess threw her nose into the air and glared down at the goblin. "I'm ready to say malevolent now," she said. "Be a good little monster and fetch her, will you?" "We're trying this again," Jack whispered, but she ignored him. The goblin snorted. You'll not be seeing anyone. How did you get out anyway? I bet you found that imp, right? I've been after him for months. You're the 5th group is let out this year. The guard looked them up and down. Though you've emerged with considerably more limbs than the others. I need no impish toy creature to free me, May exclaimed haughtily. I am a princess. I demand to see Malevolent. Jack desperately wanted to stop her, considering how well this act had played out before, but he couldn't think of anything to do that wouldn't make things worse. The guard laughed. Get back in your cell, and maybe I'll let you keep your hands. May laughed back, then she kicked the goblin in the stomach as hard as she could.
The goblin doubled over, and May grabbed his axe from his hands, then bashed him in the head with the flat of the blade. The goblin dropped to the floor, unconscious.
"See?" she said to Jack. "That's what I get for not listening to me."
It took Jack a minute to catch up, but when he did, he still couldn't think of anything to say. May just smiled sweetly at him. He shook his head, then grabbed his sword and opened the bag to see if anything was missing, beyond what had been thrown on the desk. The only thing he could find in the bag was May's fairy, who apparently had hidden herself deep in its recesses. She seemed a bit disheveled but otherwise okay as she climbed up May's shoulder and back into her spot in May's hair.
Between the items on the desk and the now empty bag, something rather important was missing. "No mirror," Jack said, feeling a chill. "That's not a good sign." May scrunched up her nose, then paused. "Hold up a second," she said. "Why wouldn't Philip be put in a cell with us? Maybe Malevolent recognized him somehow, from his father or something. She's a fairy queen after all, right? And we have to assume she would have recognized the mirror too. If we find Philip and Malevolent, we'll probably find the mirror, right?"
Jack slowly nodded as he tossed all his grandfather's prized magic items back into the bag.
"Maybe," he said. "So you're saying that instead of searching through the rest of the castle, we should just save ourselves some time and fight our way through the thousands of goblins to wherever Malevolent is?" "Pretty much," she said. "Val, I think you're getting cynical in your old age. We probably won't have to fight more than 100 or so." "Old age? I'm 14. That's barely middle age. Funny." "There's nothing funny about the life expectancy of male peasants, Princess," Jack said, trying hard not to smile. "But fine. We'll fight our way through. They're probably in the throne room, right?" "You're the expert. You're the princess. You act like that should mean something. I'm starting to wonder about that myself." "Funny," she said again, then punched him hard enough for him to think it wasn't that funny at all. "Can we just get on with this?" Jack said, rubbing his shoulder. "Of course," May said in that high-pitched voice she used whenever she really wanted to be irritating. She batted her eyes at him, then led the way down the stairs that the goblin had been guarding. Jack watched her go for a second, then shook his head and followed the princess. Fighting hundreds of goblin guards would still be easier than figuring her out.